Hello, it is time for the midweek message. And this week we are in Epiphany. And this is a beautiful week full of just gorgeous traditional stories. So I wanted to read you the Russian version of the story of Babushka, which you might know by the Italian version, which is the story of Old Befana. I might have even read that one to you a few years ago, but this one is just a beautiful, beautiful story. It's a little long, so I hope you enjoyed it. It's not too long, probably not any worse than my usual maundering on. Anyway, here it is, the story of Babushka. Long ago, so the storytellers say, on the night when the Lord of all the earth was born in Bethlehem, Babushka held a great feast. As she sat waiting for her friends in her great hall, the outer door suddenly opened. Babushka turned to welcome her guest, but the figure that stood in the doorway was of a man she did not know. She looked wonderingly at him as he stood outlined against the snow in the frosty night. His appearance was strange, yet he had the look of a great man, one whom Babushka would delight to receive. She saw that he was old and stately. Was that a coronet on his brow? Will you not come in? You are most welcome, she said. The stranger bent his head. I may not come in, he replied. I have come to invite you to a pilgrimage. I have seen the star of a king, and I go to worship him. Will you come with me? Now Babushka was very troubled. He was most certainly a king who stood in her doorway. How gladly she would receive him into her own house. There was something about his noble face that made her long to obey his call, yet the happy voices of her approaching guests called to her even more loudly. The night is cold, good sir, she faltered, and see, here come my guests. How can I leave them now? Another day I will come with you to find the king whose star shines in the east, but not tonight. And in that moment the old king was gone, and Babushka stood in wonder at the open door. But even as she peered into the darkness, there stood before her another. He too wore a king's crown and the clothes of one from a far country. His face was lit with an inward light, and his eyes shone as though into them had crept the glory of the star of the newborn king. He waved a golden censer before her from which there floated a thin, sweet-smelling cloud of smoke. I carry incense to a great king, smiled the stranger. I have seen his star in the east, and I go to worship him. Come with me and wave incense of adoration before the king. The sweet-scented cloud wrapped Babushka around, and she felt a great longing. Should she leave everything she knew and travel to find this new king? Through the cloud of incense, she saw the radiance of her candlelit room, warm and glowing and waiting for her guests. I cannot come, she said, but on another night I will travel on this pilgrimage, for I too someday would worship this king along with you. Then the incense-bearing king passed, and there stood yet one more in his place. Very gentle and young, and yet still a king. He bore in his lifted hands a golden casket. His face was alight with youthful joy, and his voice sounded like a carol, so full was it of melody and song. Babushka greatly loved his looks and cried out at once, Do not go further. Come within and rest and feast with my friends. Then tomorrow you may go on your pilgrimage, for I see that you are also traveling to see the king. But with a smile, the third king shook his head. How can one stay when one carries gifts to a king? I have seen his star in the east, and I would go to worship him. He but a child and newborn, it is said. I will go with you to worship him also, Babushka pleaded with the young king, but not tonight. Not tonight. Let us go together tomorrow. The joy in the young king's face died out. He looked within the room, the candlelit room, and he saw the gifts, the fruit, and the feast spread for the guests. "Oh, come," he said, "you have many things here that you could offer to the child king for his worship and praise. Will you not bring them? Will you not come with me?" And then he too moved from the door and passed over the trodden snow, leaving Babushka alone. As she gazed out over the track he had taken, it seemed to her that there was nothing in all the world to see save the glorious star that shone low in the eastern sky. And then she went in to her guests and the feasting in the candlelit room. That winter, with its feasting and its gay festivals, passed away. The snow and ice melted, and summer came to the land. Whilst the feasting was with her, Babushka was happy enough, but when the summer came, she remembered more and more the coming of those three strange kings and of their pilgrimage. And as winter drew near, she wondered if she would see them again and promised herself that this time she would go with him. By the time that the night of the three kings came around again, Babushka was quite determined to make this pilgrimage. But where did the young king dwell whose star had appeared in the east? She was annoyed that she had not discovered that before the three kings had disappeared. Could they have been going to visit the baby boy born at the great castle 2 or 3 miles away? Was he the one heralded by a star? Babushka gathered some of her treasures together, gold and sweet perfumes and fine clothing, and when the night had come, she, with a lady-in-waiting, carried them to the castle. The child's mother received the gift, but seemed a little amused and somewhat surprised at such an offering. She showed Babushka her baby, peevish and spoilt and whining. Babushka went home very quietly and very sad, for in all that dark night sky there was not a star to be seen, and the king she had been so willing to worship had not been found. All through that long winter and the summer that followed, and until the winter began again, Babushka hoped and waited for the night of the star and for the three kings to return. "Perhaps I may find him this year." With that thought in her mind, she set aside gifts for the kingly child, all that remained of her gold and precious goods. But on that night, when, with her treasures in her arms, she went out in the cold to find the king, she found only a starving family and no kingly babe at all. So, to the family, she gave the gifts she had set apart for him, and she returned home with a sore and aching heart. And so it came to pass that with every returning Christmas, Babushka set out to find the child as the three kings had done on that first Christmas night. But as the years went on, Babushka found that she had less and less to offer. Her gold and precious jewels had gone, and with them the fine clothing and sweet spices. At first this troubled her. She longed for a jeweled casket and a golden vessel to carry to his feet. One Christmas came and she had nothing in the world to give, except for a few toys she had made out of soft wool and sweet cakes that she had baked herself. When Babushka looked at these poor gifts before setting out to find the kingly baby, she sighed, but then afterwards she smiled. Of course, she reminded herself, the baby is growing year by year. He is old enough now to play with the gifts that I can take to him. I will carry a little tree to place these toys and sweets upon. It will make him laugh to see such a pretty tree. And this she did. And it happened that although once again she searched in vain for the kingly child, she found other children who laughed with joy for the gift of the toy-laden tree. After that, every Christmas, Babushka carried a tree, dressed with soft toys and gay ornaments and sweets, and although she grew poorer year by year and never did see the Christ child and his star, every Christmas found her searching for him, and in her search, bringing joy to the boys and girls and families around her. When Babushka was quite old, there came a Christmas tide when she had nothing in the world to offer. She had almost given up hope of ever finding the young king, and on this night, as she looked about her bare room, she said to herself, "Even if tonight I found him, I should have only empty hands to offer." Yet, nevertheless, she meant to follow the quest, although she had nothing worthy for the Christ child's hands to grasp. So after eating her supper of milk and bread, she searched round to see if there was anything at all that a child might like. In her woodshed, Babushka found a fir bough, fallen from its parent tree in the last storm. Well, this would do for a tree if she were to put it carefully in one of her brown jars. But what had she to hang upon it? She found some precious candle ends and a wooden toy and a ball left over from the last Christmas tree. She lit the candles, held the tree in her hands to look at it. Can there be any little child among my neighbors who would stretch out his hands in longing for this poor tree? She wondered. And the next moment she turned quickly to the door. There's a child crying, she said. Some child is out in that bitter cold. Who can it be? Babushka ran quickly, not stopping to put down the tree, and opened the door. A little baby lay at her threshold. As she stood in astonishment, she saw the baby stretch out his hands to the tiny lighted tree. He stopped crying and crowed with happiness at the bright ball that hung upon it. Then Babushka saw the ball was shining brightly, reflecting the light of the bright star that shone in the sky. And she knew who that child was. And in that instant, all about her was changed. She saw the Holy Family, and she saw the shepherds. She knelt and knew that the three kings of long ago were there kneeling with her. Ooh, sorry. The place was thronged with children, and the faces of the children were the faces of the boys and girls who had shared her gifts and lovely trees. Even the child of the castle was there with all of his peevishness vanished. It seemed to her that she heard the whispering of many trees, whose branches she had laden with gifts for that holy child. They had all come together to the child's manger. Nothing had been lost. Babushka's heart was full of happiness. Her search was ended. Isn't that beautiful? I love that story. I love these traditional stories. I love the fact that they remind us of who to be, how to be, that the quest is worth it, that kindness is always worth it. So until next week, and in this together with you, Reverend Stephanie signing off.